Any questions?
Yes, so it seems to me to be missing kind of a more political comments. It seems that you are talking about the economy, computer science, and so on, but there seems to be missing some assumptions that may be either hidden or missing altogether. But viewing political agents and viewing political power as relations between people, so how are we going to actually mediate conflicting interests between people or communities, and how do people actually settle on these political tensions? The other question I have for Dr. Beller would be on some of the inherent problems that I think we have currently with capitalism. I have a sticker in my notebook that has Karl Marx saying, "I told you so." It's a disclaimer. But in any case, inherent problems with capitalism like inequalities and income distribution. I think you mentioned interest or distribution of interest, but is there anything that you are foreseeing as something that could curb problems that we have now as global inequalities?
I'll just speak first, since you asked me. To the first question, my feeling is that there's still a lot of design work to be done here, but some of the mediation around conflict is, at this point, soft-coded or maybe not coded. Because this is my thinking. I mean, I don't want to speak for the other people who are present here, but that the resources to adjudicate value among people is actually underutilized. And when we allow states and legal systems and carceral systems to make those decisions for us, we get the results that we have. So I feel that by creating a peer-to-peer economic format, which is capable of expressivity, one actually opens up the democratic negotiation of decision-making processes. Right? It's a long haul. It's not like a tomorrow solution. This is like a really long project. But when we don't depend upon a technocratic solution, and we also don't depend upon an authoritarian solution, which looks top-down, I actually imagine that people will innovate economies and sustainable relationships which work for them on a peer-to-peer basis. And that's why I actually wanted to invoke prior societies in the way in which they thought about justice and the way they thought about fairness. We have a lot of resources sort of in the legacy of the repressed history of human beings. And I feel like those resources need to be allowed to percolate through an economic system. And so that's maybe answering both your questions at once, or trying to.
Yeah, sure. Hey, thanks. There's one. Maybe, John, I would add kind of, it's really important to understand the language aspect, what Ben was like kind of referring that, yeah, the denominations will be multiplied, but they interoperate because they share the grammar.
Right.
Which is really important.
And they're defined around shared values.
Mm-hmm. And here too?
Yeah, we'll go there. Okay. My question is, how do you reconcile this notion of like a post-capitalist grammar with the very basic fact that the security of blockchains is ensured by game theory that assumes nodes' chief aim is to maximize their profit?
Jorge.
Jorge, do you want to take?
Jorge, you want to add, or Dick, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, this is really to Dick, but I'm going to give it a little bit more technical angle. So basically, we see the profit making as an index. Profit making or profit maximization would be a goal that each agent, if you see this thing as a game, is trying to maximize. Basically, it influences the decision-making process by which offers are made and are accepted. So if the offer making an offer acceptance are the result of a decision, the heuristic that informs that decision would be profit maximization. So what Dick is proposing is instead of having an algorithm that is constantly trying to maximize that spread as to create a profit, we introduce another index, basically maximizing another metric. Then this profit maximization takes a secondary place. I mean, the logic that tries to make sure that like you don't go into debt and out of business, or you don't go out of self-sustainability, still there, but you no longer are trying to play the game with the goal of maximizing that spread. Instead, you're trying to maximize another spread. And that could be whenever you, the information system is enough for you to assess what would happen if you were to enter this trade, enter this position, make this trade, exit this position as a calculation of a maximization or an increase or a decrease of a particular index. So basically, by pursuing the increase of another index, then different economic decisions, different trades, different offers are made, different positions are taken that affect that. Therefore, the economic agent, it pursues something else. So it is a deliberate, explicit change of the goal of the game.
Yeah.
While still utilizing the same grammar.
Yeah, maybe we could
if I could add to that, I think both questions have been really interesting and they have something in common. And I guess what I would like to say that addresses both of them is that we are existing inside a capitalist economy and at the same time trying to create an alternative to a capitalist economy. So, we're not a sect saying come and join EXA and you'll never see the rest of the world again. We're trying to say that this alternative to capitalism inside capitalism has to have porous boundaries. But a critical issue so you've got to be able to move inside and outside of it. Your commodity exchanges within this new EXA economy will sit alongside commodity exchanges that individual agents, individual people will do within a capitalist economy. So the porosity of the boundary adds complexity to the analysis. And what we've had to work towards is to say, how can we not quarantine our total economy, but how can we give privilege to a certain set of metrics, as Jorge's just explained, that will give people pursuing individual goals an incentive to pursue things that are not driven by profitability, but by other goals. So we're not averse to individualism, but we can decouple individualism from profitability. And we can say, we believe as an ethical position, inside all people is a desire to do social good. But the problem with the profit system is it doesn't give oxygen. It doesn't encourage people to do that. People do it despite profitability. We're saying we're trying to design something that will actually encourage and nurture and reward people for doing social good. And it's never going to be a completely clean separation, but we're trying to design, and I think doing really well at designing ways of giving privilege to those other social metrics without contaminating by an overarching condition of profitability.
Good, yeah. Maybe we could even add thanks, Dick and Jorge. Maybe we could add also, maybe it was a little bit not explicit maybe in the beginning, but we were talking about distributed network protocols, which by definition really can be done with the existing blockchain technology.
Having said that, one other little thing to add is, we debate amongst ourselves a lot about issues of governance, but just for purposes of today, to open up issues of how do you conceive of and design governance within these procedures is itself a really big issue. And I take the couple of questions to date to say that we do need to spend attention and to talk at some later stage about issues of governance design.
Good.
I'm really intrigued by this discussion, and as you address the issues of how to address social economics as an alternative to capitalism within different groups, have you considered, for example, different groups and cultures that have their own economic system in place to probably create matrix around that. And I'll give an example. In my culture, my mother was a banker for the community. We had what's called a susu. And no one lived in poverty, but we weren't rich either. It was used to fund businesses, education, bills, that wasn't, couldn't be covered by salary. And I thought about, that's what intrigued me to this conference. Like, how could we take a look at these existing systems, because they're there, and create the metrics around this through cryptoeconomy to address what you're talking about?
Sure. Yeah, that's an excellent.
Let's not lose that one, though. That was really good.
It's related to it. So
Okay.
Elinor Ostrom, the only woman who ever got a Nobel Prize, hopefully there are more soon, wrote the design principles for managing commons, an example you gave. So
Sure.
when it comes to blockchain systems, I mean, that literature exists already. So maybe I, answered the question already, but I actually had the same question. So, I'm keen to hear more insights.
So the same question twice. That's good.
Well, this is, I'll just take a stab at this. This is why I'm really hesitant to hard code governance, because I feel like the real resources, and I don't believe at all in technocratic social solutions. I feel like the real resources are precisely the kind you're saying, sort of the underrepresented and partially erased economies of care and relation that people have been practicing for a long time and have been covered over by this media culture, which I think of as an extension of a colonial logic, which effectively encroaches upon our capacities for care and relation and turns it all into capitalism and makes it and liquidates its qualities. So the possibility of creating an economic space in which the design principles come from the values of the creators of that space is the kind of technology we're imagining we're working to create. But I don't think the solutions to the global problematic that we're facing are going to come at that level. I think it's going to actually, in practice, as people redesign economy.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of, there's a lot to learn. We've been studying some examples like Chamas a little bit, but there's a lot to learn. That's for sure.
Non-imperial finance. We need more of that, and I would like to talk to you later. Yeah, financial imagination. That's what we need.
I would like to make a comment that I hope connects these two things, and that is, while we brought up this sort of profit maximalizing game theory behind blockchains, it's important to note that all of those are sufficient, not necessary conditions for coordination. So as a mathematician, it's a huge difference. So it says that you can have profit maximalization and have this coordinated public good that is Bitcoin, and it works, and it's working. But the fact that it backs up to that mathematics does not say you must have profit maximalization to have this thing. It says that you can have profit maximalization and this thing. And we're talking now about other forms of coordination, other utilities, or even potentially highly heterogeneous utilities, localized utilities, all sorts of things that don't exist in the sort of arguments that are being made for these things. But that's fine, because those arguments say, if you have these things, you can have this, not if you don't have these things, you can't have that. And this means that we don't need to have a divisive argument about whether what we've observed and what we've done so far precludes the sort of alternatives that are less sort of capitalist native.
There is one interesting effect we're thinking about is not, the space that people are talking about are going to have multiple indices and multiple, call them competing things. The interesting thing in a financial market is there's actually an advantage to that, because a diversified portfolio, all right, will have less risk, right? One of the things that we have so much now on the left is make a sort of one-horse bets. We want to be able to say, even if you bet in this sector and you put, even if your favorite horse doesn't win, all right, it's still going to do some good. So that's trying to create some kind of synergy among these disparate things before we know what that synergy could be, because it's going to merge. You see, and that's really important, because we see this as an evolutionary process. We won't be able to predict, just like you can't with an earlier thing, Kickstarter. You couldn't predict, but you kind of knew that you were tapping into a sector, at least in New York, right? The arts design sector. I mean, both of us teach at design schools. 5 years ago, all our students were doing Kickstarter projects. I mean, but I'm just saying that the idea of a sector, and that's the idea of a big put.
Sure.
How would you short capitalism as a whole?
I'm kind of saying that the indifference of Bitcoin to the context in which it operates is part of the problem, right? That it's actually very limited in its financial imagination and will fall into hegemonic usage because it has no way of addressing production, or it reduces all the other externalities to noise, effectively, systemically. And it's actually the noise that we want, because the noise has resources which continue to be, that are the repressed social. And so we need to think about how to amplify that signal and broaden that signal so that qualitative valuations can actually enter into it and express themselves.
So, I mean, one way of thinking about this, though, is as long as you put something outside of the system that you care about, it's reduced to noise, and until you sort of consider it like it's going to be, basically, as long as you are framing and describing a system in a certain way, you're also affecting the way that it acts and it behaves because of the relation between the behavior and the description itself. And so by bringing those things out of the picture, they become noise, and by reintroducing them, they become signal again. Yep. And I think there's a lot of room for us to sort of understand the relationships between the models and representations of the systems that we're interacting with, implemented or even just reasoned about, and their effect on then what we actually experience.
That's why coissuance of credit and denominating value locally becomes a kind of solidarity building machine.
Okay, there.
Sort of similar to that question is how do you imagine, since we're talking about financial imagination, how do you imagine this to scale? What would be the necessary sort of rails to make this something that is not just noise and then gets reintroduced as a signal, but rather as something that can be sustainable enough to exist on its own?
Scaling, anybody?
I've talked a lot.
Jorge, do you want to take from the technical side? But basically, that's the key question, really. How does a language become valuable? The more users there is, the more you can share the same language. Yeah.
Open source.
Sorry, all right.
Open sourcing it and making it publicly available, and just offer the least barriers to entry, and hope it's going to be embraced. It's going to resonate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we can do better than that, actually. I mean, if you think about what I was saying about Bitcoin, or about, I didn't really make the full case about social media as these attention aggregators, which transform the relationship of human creative power to value extraction. These are all forms which abstract value and actually directly into computation now, and in the same moment extract them, right? But what we recognize there, and this is crucial, is that people's expressive power, their creative capacity, is the source of value production globally. So if we can create a technology which allows for expressivity to find an economic substrate, which is computable, you create a space where continued input begins to valorize that protocol and helps the development of that protocol. Right? And I really feel like this is we're doing this now, but we've been talking for 3 years already, and I think this is a 20-year conversation, quite frankly. And it's going to have a lot of different steps and a lot of stages. But if people can create convivial economic spaces where it feels better to actually express, create, and relate, they're going to come to those things, because I would. I mean, I'm a professor at an institution which sometimes I like, but most of the time I'm really annoyed by the monetization, the background monetization of my intellect, and of my students' intellect, and the fact that their brains are, basically owned because of debt. So they're already thinking about how to pay off that debt into a for-profit system before they can have any other thoughts. So if we can create these convivial spaces, then it just becomes a better place to live.
Yeah, it becomes kind of, empowering. And you can become like, it's a place of creation. I think that will be pretty attractive.
Hello. Hi. Thank you all for speaking. A lot of really interesting ideas. I have a few questions, but I think I've kind of honed in on maybe this one. I know everyone has said this or answered this question maybe in one form or another. Jorge and Dick, you guys kind of introduced it in the beginning, but regarding performance measuring sticks, right? So if profit is to capitalism, then X is to this new distributed economy. And what is X? I think you might all have a good X. So I'd love to hear it all.
Well, I think it's the X unit.
Jorge, okay.
Performance index, inflation or performance index function. It doesn't necessarily need to be maximization. It could be balancing, maintaining, between balance. The logic that tracks some other collapsed magnitude into something that can be modulated, and it's a large design space.
Akseli, sorry, I didn't. I think it's an interesting question, but I didn't quite hear it. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. So my question is regarding measuring sticks of performance, right? If profit is to capitalism, then X is to this new distributed economy. And what is X?
Yeah, gee, that's an interesting framing of the question. And I think we are intentionally not specifying X because in a distributed system it will require active agents to reach some degree of mutual agreement about that, and we recognise that this X that I'm not specifying will change over time. But I think the critical issue is we can have multiple X's. We can have X and Y and Z. Because there are multiple social goals that we would want to embrace. We're not just trying to stick another social metric over the top of profit. Indeed, the danger is when you do that, it starts to look too much like profit. So the challenge for us analytically is to keep multiple indices of performance alive in parallel with each other without saying everything is reducible to everything else. So my shortcut way of engaging that was to say, if we were to treat this simply as an adding up of, we've got 3 indices, one for care, one for the biosphere, one for arts. We say, how do we add them up? How do we put them at par? We could just develop indices and get a meta index. Mm-hmm. But we're actually saying we want to do something more elaborate than that, that if we're going to have a measure of the performance of the economy, then we've got to talk about the relationship between these different indices. And we've got to have a notion that they combine in certain ways, certain yet to be specified ways and open to discussion ways, that we the overall performance of the economy as not just GDP plus another measure divided by 3. So I think this remains an open and interesting question, but we believe we can do it without actually ourselves saying our X is something else that we're right here and now specifying.
Yeah. I have a shorter but more aspirational answer, which is X is what we want.
Yeah. What do you want? Basically,
X is what we want. I mean, I'm thinking about Randy Martin, who was part of the volatility group and had a different name. Ben has worked with him on. He was one of the people who thought about social derivatives really early, and came up with the idea of the financialization of everyday life. But he said politics was risking together to get more of what we want. And so the X becomes what we want, and it becomes a multiply instantiated variable. And I think part of the key of developing these metrics is by looking closely at the denominations that people create as a co-issue credit.
Yeah, so that's why the kind of the emphasis on the language that you can express what you want. And it's a new economic language in that sense.
I mean, what if you could write the terms of valuation, right? What if your actual values could define the economy that you create?
And be interoperable with others. That's the key too.
Got to talk to people.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we are out of time. Thank you, everybody, and hey, thanks, team. Thanks. Nick, Jorge, good work.
Hey,
See you soon.
guys.